A single number just landed on every budget conversation: $4 trillion. President Trump is calling it a windfall. The Congressional Budget Office now estimates his tariffs could cut the federal deficit by roughly $4 trillion over the next decade. That sounds like a victory, but for whom? Think about the last time you bought something imported: a phone, a washing machine, or even a fancy pizza oven. Tariffs don't vanish into thin air. They show up on price tags, invoices, and the spreadsheets of small businesses. So the real question isn't whether the government collects more revenue, it's who ends up footing the bill. Economists push back hard. Justin Wolfers, a professor of economics and public policy, warns that tariffs promised as a revenue source often end up as a disguised tax on everyday Americans. At first, importers write the checks at customs, but retail prices rarely stay the same. Companies like Best Buy may absorb costs briefly, but businesses eventually face a simple choice: eat the loss or pass costs to customers. Often, the latter wins. There's another twist. Tariffs are political tools, and political tools change. Companies won't build factories overnight if the rules keep shifting. That uncertainty blunts the job creation argument that often justifies tariffs. Later in this series, we'll hear from one small business that got slapped with what felt like an 80% tariff on a shipment, the moment that forced them to raise prices for the first time in years. We'll break down the math, explain the pass-through effect, and show step by step how a headline number becomes a charge on your credit card. Stay with me. The next section reveals who really pays and why it matters directly to your wallet, not just the federal balance sheet right now. So let's strip away the political slogans and get to the mechanics. How do tariffs actually work? Picture this. Best Buy imports a washing machine from South Korea. That machine sits at the US port until Best Buy writes a check, not to Samsung, not to a competitor, but directly to the US government. On paper, that money looks like fresh revenue. But here's the catch. Samsung doesn't lower its prices to offset that tariff. Data from the Import Price Index shows foreign companies haven't slashed costs. So while politicians may claim foreign governments are paying, the numbers tell a different story. The importer, an American company, shoulders the charge. And sooner or later, it passes down the line. Think about the chain reaction. Higher costs at the importer mean higher prices on shelves. And when shelves adjust, it ripples into your household budget, your savings, even your 401k. Tariffs are designed like taxes, except instead of being billed in April, you pay them quietly every time you swipe your card. Economists argue this is a hidden shift in who shoulders America's tax burden. Instead of high-income earners paying more through income taxes, tariffs spread costs across everyone. In other words, every consumer, whether wealthy or working class, chips in whenever imported goods are involved. The big picture? We've swapped one kind of taxation for another. But unlike an income tax, which scales with earnings, tariffs hit everyone flat. That's why some call it the most regressive form of taxation, because the impact feels heavier for middle and lower income families. But here's where the story gets even sharper. One small business, importing high-end products from Italy, suddenly discovered their tariff bill wasn't 15% or even 20%, but close to 80%. And that shock nearly broke their model overnight. Meet Fontana Forni USA, a family-run distributor, importing high-end outdoor pizza ovens directly from Italy. For decades, the company had steady operations, importing designs, working with the Fontana family, and delivering premium ovens to North American customers. But then came the tariffs. CEO Jeremy Landy explained the shock. It wasn't just one tariff. There were two. First, a 15% EU tariff, then an additional steel tariff that added another 50% on top of the raw material cost. The result? A staggering effective duty of nearly 80% on some shipments. Imagine paying almost double before your product even leaves the port. For a small business, that's not just a nuisance. It ties up cash, stalls inventory, and makes planning nearly impossible. Working with customs brokers didn't help much either, because even they weren't sure how certain tariffs were being applied. The rules kept shifting, sometimes month to month. Think about it. How do you set prices, manage warehouses, or plan marketing campaigns when you don't know if your next shipment will cost 20% more or 80% more? That unpredictability turns every order into a gamble. At first, Fontana Forni USA absorbed the hit, trying to shield customers from the shock. But numbers don't lie. By August, the company made its first price increase in years, a 10% jump. Not because they wanted to, but because survival demanded it. And here's the ripple effect. Every consumer buying one of those ovens isn't just paying for Italian craftsmanship. They're paying for Washington's tariff policies too. Multiply that across countless industries, electronics, appliances, cars, and you begin to see how $4 trillion in savings translates into billions drained quietly from consumers. Now, let's circle back to the $4 trillion headline. On paper, it looks like Washington just found a magic solution to America's debt problem. But dig deeper, and the math tells a different story. That $4 trillion isn't coming from foreign governments. It isn't coming from overseas companies. It's coming from the daily purchases of Americans. Every refrigerator, every washing machine, every imported pizza oven adds a few more dollars into the federal till. Over a decade, those small charges snowball into a massive sum. Economists warn this isn't a windfall at all. It's a tax swap. High-income taxes that once fell on the wealthiest Americans have been cut. To fill that gap, tariffs act like a sales tax, spreading the cost to everyone. And because sales taxes don't adjust for income, the burden falls heaviest on middle class and working families. To make matters more confusing, the money is already accounted for. The new federal budget has already spent that projected revenue. Tax cuts, new programs, and rising deficits mean the so-called savings won't be a cushion. They'll just cover holes that already exist. So when politicians talk about rebates, the idea of sending checks back to consumers, most experts call it unrealistic. The revenue is committed before it ever arrives, and the promises of offsetting consumer pain often fade, just like earlier claims that foreign producers would pay the bill. Here's the bigger question. If tariffs continue, are they reshaping America's tax system quietly, without a vote, without debate, and without most people realizing they're paying for it every time they shop? And that leads us to the heart of the matter. What this shift really means for American families and the future of economic policy. At its core, this isn't just a debate about trade policy. It's about fairness, transparency, and the future. Direction of the U.S. economy. Tariffs were originally sold as a tool to protect American industries, bring back jobs, and rebalance trade. But in practice, they've become an invisible tax that millions pay without realizing it. Every time you buy an imported appliance, electronics, or even steel-based products like ovens, you're contributing to that $4 trillion deficit reduction. Small. Businesses like Fontana Forni USA highlight the human cost. Owners spend sleepless nights navigating customs paperwork, juggling unpredictable costs, and deciding whether to pass price hikes onto loyal customers. Multiply that stress across thousands of companies, from auto dealers to furniture shops, and the scale becomes clear. For consumers, the reality is simple. The $400 billion raised each year isn't being pulled from corporate profits overseas. It's being drawn from American wallets, checkout counters, and bank accounts. The label may say tariff, but in effect, it's a sales tax applied to everyday life. So where does this leave us? For now, the political narrative will continue to paint tariffs as a win for America's bottom line. But experts caution that without stability, predictability, and honesty about who really pays, the costs could outweigh the benefits. Here's where you come in. Do you think tariffs are worth it if they claim to protect American industries? Or are they simply shifting the tax burden onto working families? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Your perspective shapes the conversation. Because this story isn't just about government revenue. It's about whether America's financial future is being built on promises or on the quiet sacrifices of its own consumers.